everybody, we are back. Season 2 is officially underway. But it's time you listen to this. Episode 1 will have dropped. And so now we're hopping into the second episode of season 2. Samir, how you feeling, man?
I'm feeling good because I actually have a nice mic and headset. I feel professional. Let me just say that. I mean, being stuck at home, staring at my laptop without these nice gadgets around me, felt lonely. But it feels good now.
Well, you're looking good, man. I like the setup there. You got your lighting together. So listen, we are ready to hop into this. We are welcoming Den to the Identity Jedi podcast. So thanks for coming through, man. Appreciate you. Den, I'm going to let everybody get a chance to get to know you. For those of you, because, Den's infamous. Like, if you don't know him by now, I don't know what's going on with your life. But I'm going to let you give yourself a little introduction to the people so that way they can know all about you, all your accolades and what you're all about.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, David and Samir. Hey, thanks for having me on the show, first of all. Really appreciate it. Yeah, so Dan Jones, if you don't know me, I'm the Scottish guy, I guess, that works at Banyan Security. For diversity reasons, I guess they needed a Scottish guy. So I'm the Chief Security Officer. We run IT and security and our Customer Zero platform. And prior to that, I actually ran enterprise security at Cisco, and before then, enterprise security at Adobe, where my Adobe team became a customer of Banyan in 2019, which is how I got to meet Giant and Tarun and the team. And and we formed a great partnership 2019 onwards. So here I am now, a Banyan employee, and having fun doing a lot of fun things like this and meeting guys like you.
Awesome, man. Well, listen, I'm glad Samir suggested you. I'm excited to have this conversation because you and I have a lot in common. We'll get to that here in a little bit, but I want to kick off the conversation. Look, we got to talk about the whole thing that went on with Okta, and I always tell, listen, Okta friends, as you're listening, we're not going to bash you. It's not what that's about. But I think I found this interesting from a number of reasons. Number one, the account, but I really actually liked Beyond Trust and their response and what they put out to it and how they kind of broke down how they found it. I thought that was really, really interesting and kind of showcased what identity security is really all about, like what you should be able to do with your identity solutions. But we'll kind of get that in a minute. So let's just kind of go around the horn here. Just what's your guys' take when you saw the breach kind of come out and your general reaction?
So I think for me, it was interesting, but my LinkedIn feed had two very diverse approaches to sharing the breach, right? I saw the SecOps, SIM/detection response companies, use it as a marketing opportunity to say how they could have done it, caught it earlier, blah, 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 right? And then I saw, to your point, Beyond Trust and other identity players that were more proactively talking about how you can solve for these problems upfront and not looking at it as a marketing opportunity. So that was kind of nice.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dan.
Oh, no, I was just, agreeing. I mean, we talk internally at Banyan, when a breach happens, even though if we're like, if they'd used our shit, they would have been fine. That would never have. Well, you don't want to go publicly out there and start saying that because then you just look like you're I think it's always like the insurance guy chasing the ambulance, right? And you don't want to look like that, or the lawyer chasing the ambulance. That's what it is.
Yeah, insurance guy too, though. But yeah, definitely the lawyer. I mean, look, and we knew we all knew it was gonna happen, right? We've all been around this industry long enough. We've seen it, and it's not something I agree with either. And I used to. I mean, I get it, marketers, right? Click jacking, trend jacking, whatever you want to call it, all that stuff, or whatever. But I think that mindset leads us to this false conclusion that it's like, oh, well, I just need this piece of thing and this would have never happened. And we all know that that's not the case, right? There's not going to be one thing that stops it, which is why, I really liked Beyond Trust. They posted a blog, and I'll put it in the show notes for those listening if you guys haven't read it yet. But Beyond Trust posted their blog because they were actually one of the customers affected, right? So for those of you that don't know or just haven't kept up with it, basically Okta portal that they use for their customers when they file the support tickets. An adversary got into the support portal. And we don't know, or they haven't released yet how that happened, but we just know that was breached. And part of that, the support case is that Okta asks customers to upload HTTP archive request files or HAR files. And basically it plays back the session that's going on between the network, between an application and theirs. And in there, you have everything in there, right? Like, so you got session cookies, you got all that stuff that's in there. So because they were compromised, the adversary was able to get, some of those HAR files and then kind of basically like replay sessions. And the ones that I've seen is 1Password and Beyond Trust were affected by that. And so Beyond Trust blog, what they posted was it was a timeline of, when they saw suspicious activity, what they did to stop it, what their configurations were, when they contacted Okta. And of course, I mean, they had to. I mean, they've got their Beyond Trust Intelligence Solutions, or whatever it's called. Sorry, Beyond Trust folks, I don't have the name on top of my head right now. But, of course, at the end, they said, hey, well, this is how we found it. And, we did things with our tool. But even before they got to that part, I won't, I'm not going to slay them for doing a marketing plug. They have to. But just what they saw, when they saw it, what they responded to, what policies they had set up, and why it wasn't successful, I thought that was huge. Like, really good information for identity practitioners to look and, like, guys, this is the future. You got to start, like, identity practitioners are going to start to be held to the same component as, securities. Like, you got to go break something down. It's like, hey, where were the lines of defense, and where did it break down, and what did we do? What was our policy set to either stop this or why it got in? And I really loved it. I did a whole, like, deep dive on the newsletter, and so that really got me excited to kind of see that, because, like I said earlier, I think that really identity security, kind of mantra that we've been saying and picking up the last couple of years is like, hey, this is how you're going to have to look at your identity platforms, that they're truly going to be a part of security, and here's an example of how it helped to kind of stop this attack in this case.
Yeah, and it's refreshing that we're getting to a position now in the industry where we're sharing a lot of the information about what we're seeing, how we're catching the bad people, how are we trying to defend, what can we do better. As an industry, we're sharing that with our peers. I think that becomes more the fun story in this.
Yeah.
I kind of look at the role that Okta plays. It's a very hard gig they've got. I've got a lot of friends there, and I've worked with these guys for many years. So, I don't want to bash them, because I don't think in these breaches they're making silly mistakes.
Right.
I think the way when you see the information being disclosed, the things that are happening are things that can happen to anyone. Is there other investments or things you can probably do? We can all invest more money in security, right? But as you guys know, budgets always just get tighter and tighter. So the reality is it's not sloppiness in some of these examples that these things happen. But the good news is the more people can share, the more transparent they can be, the more they can be helpful with the community about preventing stuff in the future.
Yeah, I think I'll take a counterpoint to that, Dan, and I'm going to do a little bit of Okta bashing here because it's fun. I'll start with this, right? So they've had a number of incidents that are publicly, discussed, and they did a very nice podcast, I think, with the CEO and the CISO when the first breach happened. I think it was earlier in the year. And I think that, some of the notes I read from Cloudflare, which kind of talked about table stakes controls and shared with them. And then I saw something from unravel, which is also on the SIM, next-gen SIM side. I met the co-founder not long ago. And, they kind of called out like, hey, did you roll out hardware tokens? Did you do certain things? And I think for a company as big and powerful and publicly traded, right, my fear with Okta, and this is not at all bashing the security team, the internal security team, I would not be surprised, because I've been in these shoes before, where the CISO and his team are pulled more into customer conversations to help drive revenue and are being asked to also take care of internal security. I think you might be, Banyan Security is probably getting bigger, but at a scale of Okta, they should have either field CISOs to take care of that versus pulling the team in two different directions. I think it's unfair to them as one.
Yeah.
And the second is, you're right. I think people will take opportunities to kind of call these out, and no one's perfect. But I wish Okta security, internal security, would become more a part of our communities, the way you are, Dan, right? So you're part of a number of Slack channels, you interact with practitioners. It almost feels like a lot of these product companies will keep their CISOs away from, kind of discussing and collaborating and resolving. MGM CISO is a great example. He was very, very insightful and partnering with the internal CISO community on how they could do a better job in the future. So that's just my one gripe with Okta at this point.
Yeah, and I think if you look at how they handled the larger breach, what I would say is the big main Okta breach, right? If you look at how they handled that at the very start, it was a bit of a cluster, right? And my sneaky suspicion, and some of the things I may have heard since then, is, when you're the founder of a company and your company's under attack, then your ability to hold yourself back and not get involved is impossible. So I think at some point you've got someone who's a founder who actually has no real security experience or any breach experience, and trying to jump in and handle what effectively should be someone who's got the professional experience of doing it. So the difference between me versus Giant and Tarun or Yoshio handling a breach is I've been involved in breaches. I know things like breach communication. I know an incident response. I know, so I've got experience because I've been in the trench. They haven't. But if you're ever a founder of a company and then you find yourself breached, I think it's damn near impossible for them not to want to take control. And I can imagine that big Okta breach, that was the kind of thing that happened. I'd love to see on this one, the CISO being allowed full autonomy to actually run the playbook and deal with the breach publicly, internally, and get a better plan moving forward.
Makes sense.
Yeah. What I'm going to take a little detour, right, from some of the things we're going to discuss. I want to let's stay on this topic a little bit, right, because the two of you, right, have both kind of been in that chair, right, in that CISO seat, right. You're chief security officer now. Dan, Samir, you've been a CISO there. Like, walk me through and walk the audience through like a day in the life, right? So it's you know what I'm saying? It's Tuesday at like 3 a.m., right? And you get this call like, hey, Dan, we got a problem, right? Like, what's that process like? Like, what's going through your head? What are you doing? Like, how are you leading that team through that to make sure that it's like, to your point, hey, look, we got to respond, like, you got to learn the communications, but like, what are some of the things that, you walk through when that happens?
Do you want me to go first, Samir, and then you add some color and sparkle?
Sparkle is like, right, go ahead.
So Dave, first of all, it's never a Tuesday at 3 p.m. It's always a Friday at 5. You're trying to start your weekend, then the shit hits the fan. And ultimately, if you're good at your job and funded appropriately, then you will have already been able to come up with an incident playbook, which will include a communications plan. You'll have already done tabletop exercises. You will ideally think of all the bad things that may happen throughout the year. And then the scenario that now you're getting a phone call on, you should be able to go page 1 on the playbook and be like, I know the people I need to assemble. I know the communications, the legal, the instant responder. Your legal counsel that you call upon, you might already have an agreement with them that you're going to call upon a Mandian or, some of these people. If you've got a relationship with the government, you might call in your friends at the FBI for their assistance. So you start to assemble that team together, and then you're really going through. It's triaging the data. I mean, you're really looking for what is the current situation we're dealing with, because generally speaking, you get a call that says, I've seen something and it looks like something bad is happening. There's no definitive they've stolen data. At this point, you don't even know if you have got a breach that's worthy of a disclosure. So that ticking clock of like 48 hours, or depending on which country you're in and which state you're in, the clocks all vary, right? You will not even know at that point whether you've got a breach that is actually with data that's been stolen or they've taken screenshots. So you just don't know yet. So until you get to that point of triaging what's actually underway, then you don't really know the next steps. But your playbook should have a set of scenarios and what ifs where you're like, if this happens, we're going this direction. If this happens, we go that direction. And I remember just before I left Cisco, we done a tabletop exercise with my friends at Fortification, and they did a brilliant job, and we picked a great scenario. We had like the CEO and his direct reports and led the whole thing. And it was fascinating to see their eyes open and the holy shit moments that they think of, because the team were throwing some really gnarly examples. And I think we picked on Meraki or something because it's all camera systems. And we're like, imagine the bad guys have got over your camera systems and your customers' cameras. And then just so you could just see the like the fear of death rolling over their face, you know. Sorry, Samir, right? Color and sparkle.
You did the skull, the sparkle, and the rainbows too. It was awesome. I think there's very little I can add to what Dan just said because I've experienced exactly that. I think the more tabletops, the more egregious the scenarios, the more you open up eyes and get people to back you. I think one thing I've realized during breach scenarios is there's no hierarchy. There's no, I'm going to talk to my director of SecOps who's going to talk to his manager in fraud and who's going to talk to 3 other people, right? We just all become equals. There's a lot of F-bombs that go, at least in my world. And that's just maybe how I communicate. Hopefully nobody from HR is listening to this, but let's continue. I think the truth is that the fact that you said, Dan, at a, incredibly large and complex company like Cisco, getting the CEO involved, getting the C-level folks involved. And what I found is if you're the CISO or even the CTO or whoever your boss is, when they kind of take themselves out of the situation, right, where they're like, it's a breach. The security guys are running it, not me. I'm the CTO or CIO, right? Then you don't have that protective layer of let's executive coach this into for precision, right? And to Dan's point, it's having the right partners is key, but I think having the right sense of if it's a breach in what I think this example is customer success team or support team, you're never going to always have the right person to talk to, right? And so how do you make sure that you have the right people to back them up when you do need information? I think, David, where I would love for you to kind of chime in at some point on this is, you mentioned something really interesting at the beginning of this podcast around how Beyond Trust almost became the identity threat provider or identity kind of forensics provider in some sense. That's always been a gap in my eyes, right? For me, I don't know if you face this, Dan, but identity didn't always report to me. They'd have a dotted line to me. They'd be part of infrastructure and everything tied back to them. Because usually it was a customer success account or an internal admin account getting compromised. And we oftentimes did not have that telemetry, right? So yeah. I'd love to learn to still be a good CISO, even if I'm not one, David. So please continue.
Yeah, and Adobe. So one thing, there was 2013 famous breach, right? That hit many companies in the Valley, and Adobe was caught up in all of that. And one of the things that they done as a response to that event was they as they invested in this centralized security team within IT, they actually moved all of the identity stack people and directory services and all the things like certificates and all that stuff all under one team. So we centralized that all under security because it was a realization that identity is at the forefront of that security posture, So the reality is get your security teams. They're either within the CISO's organization if the CISO rolls up to the CIO, or if it's a CSO like me where we're separate from an IT organization, then they'd be in the CSO's organization. After some moves and shuffles, Brad, my old boss, was a CSO at Adobe. I moved out of IT into his organization with enterprise security. So even the whole identity stack was not even part of IT. And that changes the investment. It changes the posture. It changes the fight for the funds. It was surprisingly well how well it worked out. I really enjoyed not being in IT because it almost feels like if you're in an engineering kind of leadership team, there's less bureaucracy and bullshit. So I loved that fact of it. And then within the security game, because we're in security, we could work on the posture across the whole security leadership team, which was really refreshing.
And that's excellent to hear. I know it's definitely something I've seen as I've been talking to customers. I've seen that trend the last couple of years of identity teams moving over into security teams. And back to your point, Samir, about what I made earlier about Beyond Trust is, it's when you go through the blog, we don't know exactly their layout, but the way that they detail, right, where a compromised account, where they saw attempts to initiate and access their Okta admin, their Okta admin dashboard. Then they went over API. When that didn't work, then they went over API. Like, but at every point they're saying, hey, this is why this didn't work, right? They couldn't get to the Okta dashboard because we require that when even if you get an authenticated session, you have to have Okta verify on the device. Well, the device they were coming from didn't have Okta verify. But they still had the session. So then the adversary said, okay, we're going to go command line, right? Well, command line, unfortunately, doesn't have the same restrictions from the way their dashboard did. They were able to get through and initiate something. So then they created an account. But they were able to flag and see that there was a new account created. It was even created with their standards. But from there, they were still able to block the account from doing things, right? So just kind of showing you where, like, in their cycle as they were detecting this, how the identity controls that they had were preventing a lot of this from happening, either by policies or other identity controls that they had in place. And so I just think it's a good proving point that, like, this is, to that aspect, right? Like, yes, identity is going to be central to this. This is how they're getting in. So it's like your identity stack that is going to be involved in it. You need to be understanding. I could even make, when I read through it, the argument that they didn't say it in detail, but the fact that they were able to say, well, we had this admin API, they created a new account, right? So they tried to create a new service account and use it. Well, the only way they would have been able to block that is they were literally tracking it and looking at it, which I don't think, but they had to have some kind of policies around, hey, when we see a new account created, there's specific steps that you want to do, which kind of goes back to, like, why we started all this with identity tools and going to administration is we want to automate and have controls around the life cycle new accounts are created. You want to take certain steps to do things. Because in this case, when something does happen, it's like, hey, if this is outside the norm, like, we can actually do something. We can flag somebody. We can have something, tied with it, right? So it's a beautiful case story of, like, this. Literally, here's how identity sits in, and here's how identity controls. In this case, for Beyond Trust, like, not only stopped anything from happening, but then when they were to investigate, they were able to go back to Okta, share information, and go, hey, we think that you guys may be compromised because we're now able to track based on this, like, how this even happened, right? And that's the thing about it, right? We're, like I said, we're moving into this phase, or call it identity security, whatever you want. Like, identity's forefront now. So you've got to not only have tools that allow you to do this, but you're practitioners, right? You got to start thinking like security folks now, right? Like, they've got to be involved in this. And so kind of going back to those table exercises you guys were doing, like, and I probably know the answer, but, like, how much was, when you guys have those exercises, like, how much was the identity teams involved in those discussions?
I'm trying to think. I don't remember purely an identity team being involved. I remember that we had some UEBA data pulled from critical systems logging, etc. Mm-hmm. So it's just basically what playbooks the SecOps teams had already kind of aligned. I think when you started using terms like command line interface with Okta and different ways to interact with your identity infrastructure and your identity kind of front end, if you will, I think the complexity since I was CISO, or even more recently, has ballooned, right? If you think about it, Okta is no longer just your SSO MFA provider. They do a lot more, right? And so I think bringing that under the auspicious list of critical vendors, or call it, critical to the company's infrastructure, is step one. I think the second step is, like you said, thinking like an attacker. What are the different ways I can, whether it's an API from Okta I can use, whether it's they've published their software development kit, maybe different ways that we can mess up using Okta internally. But I don't remember we ever bringing in the identity team. And maybe this just dates me, but we tend to bring in the firewall team, the OS team, the operating system teams, etc., but not so much on that side.
Wow. Yeah. So there's a couple of things. One is identity was seen historically just as another service in your IT stack. So you were more rewarded for getting accounts created quickly, getting them disabled quickly, adding people to groups quickly. It was a very commoditized situation. And that really meant that the number of people who had access to do those things were pretty expansive over the years. Now, one of the things that my team's previously done was we actually limited who could create or disable an account within Okta plus Active Directory or any of our directory services environments, and limited which account could actually create privileged accounts inside like our CyberArk vault. And then what we done was, because if you think about it, whether it's API or whether it's a GUI interface, the reality is it's still an account interacting with this platform to do transactions. So what we done was we said, wait a minute, only this account can interact with this platform for these type of tasks or activities. And then we wall gardened that off and done extra layers of security just around that piece there. And then in front of that, then we enabled some other things that had even more checks and balances. So we were removing this thing many layers away from the attack surface. But I do think that, you know, we get hung up on there's accounts and identity security, and then we really get hung up on, I think, sometimes the wrong things. You know, we talk about least privilege and we talk about role-based access control. The amount of money we spend as an industry to actually try and accomplish those two things, when the reality is a lot of these breaches happen because the account got compromised and used the permissions the person needed to do the job anyway. The person had the permissions. They were a support person who had access to do some gnarly shit. So the reality is all those other things that we get really distracted a lot with, because they are expensive. Those two things are very expensive. And we need to automate a lot of that way more than we do. And maybe AI is going to help in the future and it'll all be wonderful and magical unicorns and stuff. But the problem doesn't go away. The problem is still Den had permissions to do something in Den's role because that was his role at the company. They looked me up on LinkedIn. They knew who I was. They then social engineered me. I clicked a link because I don't know any better. And now they got Den's creds and they're on Den's device. It's not a hard. I mean, someone said this to me last week. They were like, how do I feel the security industry has changed over the years? And I went, not at all. And he kind of looked at me puzzled. And I went, it's the same shit that it was 20 years ago. Now, the difference is the attackers and the defenders we've all evolved. But at the end of it, I'm still going after the end user or the stuff you misconfigured that's on the internet or your third party. There's not a lot of people you're going after as an attacker. And then as defenders, we're just playing cat and mouse. We've always played cat and mouse. We're just, you know, it just continues to evolve. It's not magic. It's just, there's an evolution to this. And Samir, I'm a little controversial on some of my little statements there. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
No, I think you're actually, you know, not far off from how I think of it, right? Which is first of all, I think CISOs have had to evolve to take bigger ownership. You mentioned Brad, who's a well-respected CISO in the Bay Area and just nationally, right? If you think about it, the attack surface has gotten broader, bigger. There's more digitization, processes. You know, the chief digital officer, the new title that I keep hearing, has worked very hard to kind of make sure that there's less and less manual steps that could be flawed from a business standpoint or a customer delivery standpoint. But then we've opened up this can of worms around the attack surface, right? And the entry points and the potential vulnerabilities of data being exposed, et cetera. That's why I think software supply chain has been, I think, one of the biggest investment points for VCs last year or this year. But on that topic, I think the lack of understanding, right? So when I think about it, security has maybe raised the bar a little bit, but the threat vectors have also raised their bar, right? Yeah. And so we really haven't moved the needle much, first of all. Secondly, I think getting people to speak the language of security and identity, right? So I'll use an example. So I think for a lot of people, an identity is actually an email address, right? It's one primary email address, but there's a lot of identities. And when we talk about identity security, we sometimes miss the accounts, the accessibility, and that's when it kind of opens up that can of worms and we think, oh, you know, we've got MFA in place for his account, his main account and his privileged account, et cetera. But what about all the other service accounts I've created, right? For example. And then when we start digging, what happens is we frustrate infrastructure and IT. They come and say, man, these guys are so annoying. They just keep asking more and more questions. They just tend to be, they're kind of like a technical and more inquisitive auditors. Get them out of my office, right? Yeah. What's the bar is enough. We've already talked about users. We've protected them. Why the heck is he getting in my business, right? And so that till that changes, and I think the CISOs who have done a great job, I was going to circle back and say, I'm just curiously, if anybody knows this, please tell me, how many CISOs has Okta had in the last 5 years? I think it's only been 2, right? But I might be wrong,
Yep.
right?
That's
Which
it.
is it's just 2, so that's a good thing, right? But on the other companies that you and I all interact with, there's a lot of CISOs looking for gigs. There's a lot of CISOs unhappy in their gigs. There's a lot of CISOs outside of the Bay Area who are still treated like chopped liver because people say, well, why do I need a CISO for a trucking company? Right? When all of their processes are with third parties and SaaS vendors. Feel bad for those people, right? So
Yeah.
So I want to.
Sorry, that was a lot.
No, listen. This is why we're here. I want to take a quick pivot, right? And we're gonna. This is for Dan, right? We talked about this in some of the pre-show meetings, right? You've got a very good perspective on zero trust. So I want to kind of give you the floor a little bit to kind of talk about that, because it's one of these things that I've been on record as saying, like, we market way too much in this fucking industry, right? Like we find a term and we let marketers go crazy. Marketers, I love you. I'm just saying, right? I'm not saying you can't do your job. You should do your job, but we take it so far, right? And I think security in general, but especially identity, we are so far ahead of where our customers are. We're speaking to things like and marketing to them and pushing features on them and talking about all these things, and they're like, cool. Hey man, I'm just still trying to add 1 + 1. Like you're talking to me about differential equations, and I'm just trying to figure out 1 + 1, man. Like so like that sounds great. And then that's when you get the whole sci-fi fiction of it, and then the user's just kind of like, why do I need this, right? And I think that's the problem we kept hitting. Why do I need this?
Yeah.
Because we're keep preaching all this thing, and we're so far ahead of them. But you've got experience in like actual world experience of like walking through that, a little bit about that. Like, what are your takes on it? And what was it like walking through the process of actually implementing what true zero trust architecture is?
Yeah. So so there's a couple of things I'd start with. One is, and Samir touched on this, the role of a CISO has evolved, right? It's been evolving over years. And one of the roles is you actually have to be a good salesman. You have to explain to people how the new whiz-bang investment that you're going to make is going to make your company more secure, but then touching on Samir's other point, less friction is actually better. If I can say you'll be more secure and there'll be less friction, then people will enjoy your magical thing you're about to bestow upon them. The other thing is for many years, executives or leaders in IT and security were rewarded for deploying technology. So it's like your quarterly goal. I'll deploy CyberArk. Cool, you deployed it, but what business value did it bring? How did it secure or enhance your business? So the role and how we talk about these things, I think, needs to continue to evolve in a way to remind people we're all here to run a business. Whichever person employs me, I'm trying to ensure that they can make profit and their business is going fast, especially if they're in a fast-paced thing and time to market is quick. Then the last thing they need is a security organization to roll in and slow them down, right? So now, get into zero trust. As you guys know, a lot of security practitioners really evolved through the whole networking game, right? So it was really more firewalls, more network segments. And it's like, holy crap, man, that operationally slows you down. So when you look at something like what Google were doing with Beyond Corp, and I think this all stemmed from the Aurora incident way back when, and then the reality is one of my architects, he said, we should do this zero trust thing. So problem number one is the term. Who gives a crap? I don't care the term zero trust. It's not the thing you're chasing. The problem is you go back to marketing, David, is so many people do the, what CIO Monthly magazine, and you need some zero trust in your life. And then they'll all poll CISOs and say, how many of you plan to do zero trust? I think the first question they forgot to ask was, do you know what the heck zero trust even is? And what do you mean when you say zero trust? Because if you speak to 20 vendors, they've got 30 different answers. And if you speak to 20 CISOs, they've got 20 different answers too. So I'll play it back. When we said zero trust at Adobe, this goes back to 2017. We said most of our employees, more and more are remote, and most of our applications are cloud-based. Less and less are built on-prem. They come in your network sometimes, but there's no guarantee. And what we had seen was bad actors attack us. And because we were using things like Okta, which is a cloud-based directory, anybody can log in and go den.adobe.okta.com, password, username, and password. Let me just try and break in there. Let me do an MFA thing or SIM swap attack. I'll maybe use your phone number. That's even easier. So the reality is we wanted to combat that piece first of all. The second piece was anybody gets to log in regardless of the device they're on. So now I can log in and go straight to salesforce.com, and I've got 5 different devices, but we don't know anything about these devices. We're not doing anything about that. And then the third thing is when you do have to VPN in, there's 40,000 people in Adobe. When do they know that you need to open VPN or not? Because they shouldn't have to care. But we made them care because that was 20 years ago how you got into applications because they were in your network. Well, 80% are not in the network now. So how do they care about the 20% that still are? So we set about and we said we're going to do 3 things. We're going to get rid of VPN. We're going to tie the devices to the user identity, and we're going to get rid of passwords and do the posture check as part of that. And that really meant that you had to be on a device that met our minimum bar, and in you come. But then we also take these apps that were internally and we made them cloud-like. We still had a reverse proxy type situation going on, but it made you feel the app was cloud-like. And you're accessing the app a higher layer in the OSI stack than you are getting to the network. So when you VPN in, if your device is compromised, you can launch an attack against the whole network. But when you do it via our method, you can't. You can only get to the app. And then we were doing some other security stuff on top as part of that workflow. Very interesting. Now, we done 7 months. We deployed to 40,000 people from a proof of concept just to deploy. And that was 2017 before we met Banyan. We did a lot of gnarly architecture in that, which meant you were coming on-prem even if you were resulting going out to a cloud app. So that wasn't good. So I asked my team, go find me a cloud service that will do this. And there wasn't in 2018 very many competent companies around. So that's when we started to meet with Tarun and Banyan and these guys. And they were like, oh, yeah, we can work with you on that. That's a strategy we're chasing too. We became a customer in 2019. Having experienced and working with the team at Banyan, my confidence in working with them, being their CSO, knowing the product, knowing the team and the tech, I know that we kick ass and take names. So I'm really comfortable with that. And Adobe's still, our big customer. I see a lot of companies and a lot of vendors, and they'll say they can do some zero trusty stuff. Big thing for me is, hey, your integrations. Do you integrate? Are you like API first? Are you 100% cloud-based? And can you deploy in minutes? And then finally, what's your operational cost? So whenever I talk to the team back at Banyan, any new feature or thing we're building, it's like, yeah, but what's the operational cost of the thing? And we are really light on that operational cost, because that's a principle for us, is you can't delight your customer, but have them have to slog inside your admin console every day. That's not delightful. So that was a big thing, a really big thing for us. And at Cisco, we done a similar thing, different technology stack, different challenges. But the biggest thing is you're never being asked, you never have to ask 100,000 people if they'd like to log in less. It was never a question I found myself saying. And I've done this shit since 1994, right? So I've been in this game a long time. And one of the biggest complaints is I log in all the time. I hate VPN. And then service desk tickets in the top 10 of the service desk ticket by quantity. In top 10 is always password change related tickets. We were just at by 80% at Adobe by deploying this solution, which is great.
I think everything you said, Dan, is actual gold, right? I mean, it almost goes back to the whole like, we speak to enough vendors. All of us have spoken to vendors, and it's always like one click, you'll be up and running, blah blah blah, right? But I think CISOs and just people who are listening to this podcast should really pay attention to the total cost of ownership. And it's not just, we used to think of total cost of ownership as I need to pay for support and I might need to pay for 5 more integrations. All that is chump change compared to having to stand up an entire team to manage the tool, having to, answer questions because it's not intuitive, because we built software initially in security that looked like a firewall interface, right? Maybe they've evolved now, but I haven't looked at one. But yeah, it's old school. It looks like a .NET application. And then, I think the next thing is like the downstream impact, right? So, this is going to help me get great visibility, right? I'm going to find something from this tool and I'm going to push it off. And, it's a zero trust tool that says this person is not coming in from the right laptop, but has the 2 credentials we need, or is coming from an IP that is known, right? And that gray area, right, where you just send it off to somebody else to approve, that approval mechanism, the right person, the escalation paths. A lot of the vendors who haven't been practitioners like you, Dan, don't understand the downstream impact of whether it's service desk, management, senior management. The last thing you want is your CEO saying, I have to approve Dan's access from where? Why?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think thinking of this end to end, and zero trust is a good term because it means a lot of things to a lot of people. But I think everything you said was gold in my eyes. So awesome.
It means the term means a lot more for the analysts at Gartner and Forrester who actually haven't deployed this shit. That's the thing for me. It's like, I understand why people want a magic quadrant, but at the same point, there's a lot of people there's a lot of people that just get overwhelmed with the amount of information being published by analysts, by companies, marketing teams, and even the government, right? CISO's involved, and they're like, oh, here's and this, and it's like, yeah, you could spend the next 10 years reading on what you should do about zero trust and not have a clue within your organization how to even get started. And that for me is a huge thing, And then the other thing that I get blown away with is in vendors, they make it complicated to buy their stuff sometimes, I remember years ago, HP and BMC were buying their service management platform, and HP had more SKUs than shit. And at the end of it, it's like, yeah, but I just want an easy purchase price. And the creative people at BMC, they said, don't worry about it. We'll just license per user. And that's it. We'll at the back end figure it out, but your price per user is going to be this. And we're like, holy crap, that's amazing. No matter how many servers we had or blah, 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 blahs. So for me, we've got competitors like up against us, and they're like, oh, do you need 3 modules? Where do you need your gateways? How many users? How many devices? And and there's like 5 different SKUs. And then on top of it, professional services. And, you need a ongoing support contract. And I think the reality is like, again, one thing we've striven for, and I wish every vendor done this, is I don't need professional services. We don't even have a PS team. We've got a customer success team. You'll be up and running within 30 days. You'll get value in the first week if you want. It's based on your politics and your company. But then there's no add-ons. There's nothing. No professional services. If you want to do some cool creative thing and add 54 more apps later or whatever, call us up. We'll work with you. It's part of the price. More and more companies need to make it that easy to engage and get value quick. End of my rant. I need to drop a mic somewhere. I'll get the spare mic out.
Yeah, get the spare mic. Don't drop the Rodecaster mic.
Get the spare mic. Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, that was, I can't think of a better way to end it. I mean, right there, right? Then we gotta let you end on your drop the mic moment. So appreciate you coming out, man. And man, we'll have to have you back on again. I got there's a bunch of other questions I want to get into, and so you know what, Dan, we're gonna put you into our live show category list, right? Once me and Samir figure out where the next live show is, man, we got to have you come out to that because I think that'll be fun.
Yeah, let's go on the road, you know.
Listen, let's do it. All right. So with that, look, we're signing off. Thanks everybody for tuning in to Identity Jedi Show podcast. You can check us out on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast from. You can also get Identity Jedi Show. You know where to find us. Until next time, you guys know what it is. Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. Love each other. See you guys next time.